Now we're gonna talk about the M3, the strobe. This is the most powerful part of impact shows. That's also the most overlooked. And that's because it doesn't translate well over video. But this is the part that really leaves the impact. And here is where the viewer really feels the show. They're not just watching it, they really start to feel it because it takes their senses and it completely messes with them. The M3s are usually used to wrap up a show at the end, and many think they're very easy. They're not. So I'll go a little bit into the science behind it. This iNova light is blinking at this rate, and it's very, very bright. It doesn't look bright in this video, but in person, this light is very bright. So this light is almost like a strobe light at a club or like at a festival, right? Where it like can cause seizures or it like, it's just like on, off, on, off, on, off. It's just going at a different frequency. And what happens is when you shine the light in someone's eye, the brightness causes their pupil to contract. And then after the brightness goes away, it causes it to dilate. And so what happens is their pupils are constantly dilating and constricting, right? They're opening and closing, opening and closing. And that changes the amount of light that comes into their eyes. Not only from the iNova, but everywhere around too. Imagine your phone camera or something, right? And you just change the brightness all the way up and the brightness all the way down. And you just constantly do that over and over. It can get very disorienting. And that is what a strobe light does. It messes with the pupil dilation so that everything around them starts getting disoriented. Not only that, but each blink also leaves an afterglow because the light is so bright. And so they begin seeing this aura around the thumbs while simultaneously getting melted by every single blink. And that is the power of strobes. This completely disorients and destroys the viewer, and it keeps them trapped in your hands. Now, the key to strobes are to use very small, precise movements that are sharp. The exact details make your hands come alive, almost as if they're communicating with the viewer. And the sharpness makes it intense. And remember, impact shows, we want them intense. So we want every single move to be sharp and exact. See, these thumbs are glaring at them and just destroying them. And so we want these other fingers to follow suit and also be just as intense, right? Instead of just like a soft creature that's kind of flowing around like this, it's almost like each leg is attacking them. It's like boom, 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 boom. That's what strobes feel like when they're sharp and they're intense. Now, my favorite thing to do here are creatures, hands down. And I always played with my little creatures as a kid, and being able to play with them in a doper setting with the iNovas is just like my dream come true. And so one move that Skittles always did was, of course, this one I just showed you, right? The key is sharpness. One that I like to do is this creature right here, which is very similar. Boom, 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 boom. Right? All about the sharpness. And when you're doing this spider-like creature, you want to make sure your fingers are going in the exact same place every time. You can also bring in smaller moves like digits or dials and clusters. So if you're doing like stuff like this, you could do dials like this, and then you could kind of open them up like this. And then go back to one of these maybe. I think dials and clusters are highly, highly underutilized in strobes, and there's a lot to be expanded on in that area. The key is you want to make those dials sharp. And so I know a lot of dialers, like they take their time like this, and yeah, it looks cool. It does look cool. But with strobes, you want to make sure it's sharp, right? And so if you're taking your time with a dial like this, it's not going to be as powerful. And so if you do start exploring the dials with the strobes, remember to make them as clean and precise as possible. Now, when you're doing your strobes, you want to stay really close to their face so that the blinks can really melt them away. And You also want to be far enough so that they could see your other fingers. Because if you're too close, they're not going to be able to see the other fingers moving around. And if you're too far, they're not going to feel the strobes. And so you want to find that sweet spot where they could see all of your fingers and the strobes are powerful enough to melt them away. You also want to point the light directly in the middle of their eyes. You don't want them pointing like off to the side like this. You don't want them pointing down like one pointing up. You want them perfectly placed in the middle of their eyes. And their vision will go like this as they're looking at the strobes. It'll come to the center, and that is the most convenient place to point them. Yeah, you just shine it right here and they're gonna feel it. Trust me. Another thing you could do is play with depth perception. And so you could play around with their peripheries, right? You can go to the side like this, you can do this stuff, and then you could bring the strobes back in. And when you start mixing in those peripheral moves, that's when it becomes even more of a sensory experience, and not just something that they're watching, but something that they're really feeling. Another thing you want to do is you want to let their eyes breathe. I made this mistake for so long. I would just keep them blinking in their eyes the entire time. I'd do like a 3-minute strobing session, and I would just keep it right there the whole time. And what happens when you just strobe them for super long is they start getting strobe fatigue and their eyes start getting tired. They kind of drown out the strobes and it loses its impact. And so you want to make sure you mix in times where you let their eyes breathe, where you take away the strobes and you show them some trails or something that will just stop this madness that's melting them away. Again, in impacts, we want to always surprise them and leave them guessing what's coming next. And so if you just do the same repetitive strobe in their eye the whole time, it's going to lose its potency. You also want to make sure you're watching the viewer's reaction, because if you like hit them with a strobe, and they're like squinting and they're barely surviving, you don't want to just keep blinding them. Use it tastefully, because some people really can't handle it. So I like to push the boundaries a little bit. I'll hit them with some very intense strobes, and then I'll let them breathe for a little and see how they react. And if they like it, if they smile, then I'll hit them with some more. But I'll always remember to give them space to breathe. And you could give them space by like closing your hands, doing some of this stuff. You could hit them with like some dials here. That's really cool. You could start using the peripherals to give their eyes a break. You can move your hands back. You could start going into finger rolls. Anything that just takes the strobes off their eyes for even just a second will give them a little space to breathe. Now, strobing takes a lot of practice and it takes time, because you gotta think of like those small, precise movements and they gotta be placed exactly. And even me, I've spent a lot of time strobing, and during shows when I'm giving someone a show, I constantly have to remind myself to slow down, because it can be very difficult when you're throwing a high intensity show and you're like throwing M2s all fast and you're hitting them with these intense M1s. And then you have to go to this strobe section where all of a sudden you have to make like these small moves. You got to remind yourself to breathe as well and really slow everything down. Now, the master of strobes is hands down Skittles. Nobody has come close to his detail in his strobes yet. The way his hands move, every single movement is exactly placed, not just on the X, Y plane, but also on the Z plane in the depth perception. So when these two fingers come out, they come out at the perfect place, both left, forward, and up. And they're exactly placed every time. And so this little creature that he shows you, straight up feels like it's talking to you. And his videos they don't do the strobes justice, because videos never do the strobes justice. But I highly recommend that you watch his videos, especially the ones where he's giving the camera a show, and look at the strobing section and see exactly how he places his fingers. It's going to be a little difficult to tell, but if you analyze it closely, you'll see that there is a lot of thought and a lot of effort and a lot of time put into the placement of his strobes. And so your action item is practice your strobes. Put them directly in the middle. Make sure they're aligned. Make sure one is not poking out in front of the other. Make sure they're perfectly aligned. And then just practice this. Boom, boom. Bring it back in, back in. And this is the classic Skittles strobe. And you want to make it super sharp. And if you want, once you get that down, you can pop them out more. Just practice making them sharp. And again, it's gonna take time, so please don't rush through this because almost every impactor does not practice their strobes. And in my opinion, it's really the coolest part where people start to have a connection with your show and they really feel like the hands are communicating to them. And so please practice these, spend time on them. When we meet in person and you give me a show, I want to be so excited at how much your hands communicate to me through your strobes.